Hello and welcome to Hops and Bros. This week,
We're talking about cask ales. Yes, the real thing.
For an open window on the crowded world, Max and Chris from Ups and Ups and Bros. Welcome to Ups and Bros. Yeah.
alright, so this week, real ales or cask ales, depending on how you want to see them, which is, of my understanding, a mainly British thing. At least that's where it originated, but it did make its way to a lot of more places. It wasn't a simpler time before you had all those fancy kegs and bottles and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But if not, it's something that's still used. I mean, last week we went to a fest. It is exactly what it is. It's a cask fest.
Yep.
Which is incredible when you really think about it, that still to this day, an old method of carrying beer can still be this popular.
Yeah.
And not only that, but we had a chance to go to Wellington, the Wellington Cask Fest, which is one of the biggest ones around and one of the best ones if you ask me. Had a chance to see Marv, had a chance to see all the folks from Wellington Brewery, and try some beers from not only them, but from other people who did casks especially for that event.
Exactly. And it was superb. Just fantastic event. But
It was a great event. It was
yeah.
really nice.
Yeah, and while we were doing the recap of this event, it kind of like blossomed in our minds that we should do a Craft Beer 101 on cask. So you guys will know the difference, or just next time you're in a bar and you see a cask beer, you can just like drop some knowledge like this on your friends about it. So Max already kind of like took the historic part slowly, like he scraped it a little bit, but mostly beers have been around forever, and casks have been C in writings for over like 424 BC. I don't know if it's the proper way to explain it, but they found some writings about casks going back to 424 BC. Main reason of casks, it's easy to travel with. And they had no bottles back then, and for them it was easy to just put the beer in there, keep a second fermentation going on, and travel the beer within different borders. And we all know the Brits were pretty strong. Had a big army, had a big navy, they were pretty much everywhere, and beer was traveling with the army at all times. So this is where kind of like the cask took over the whole territory, the whole world.
Yeah, casks were a great way to transport your beer, because if you always have a bit of yeast in your beer, there's always a bit of fermentation going on.
Yeah.
So your beer it goes bad, but it takes a lot longer, right? You can preserve it for longer periods of time, and you still have a bit of carbonation in it because it's constantly producing carbonation. Now, as we know, back then they used wooden casks,
Yeah.
and wood is not a great way to carbonate beer. It's very porous. The CO2 just escapes from everywhere.
Exactly.
So if you have a constant production of that, then you're kind of limiting the oxygen that can potentially enter your beer.
Exactly. So after that, moving to a bit more modern times, we're speaking between 1950 and 1970, we already did an episode on that, CO2. So CO2 came along. It's already a natural part of beer, but of course, to make the production of beer a lot easier, then brewers started pushing CO2 at the end of the production of the beer after fermentation. So you can get a steady amount of bubbles, a nice carbonation level without kind of like losing that nice fuzz in your beer. But what happened is that you started seeing a lot more kegs and draft beers, but casks were also available. But casks were just carbonated beer served in the cask way. So with the cask pump, or with the little spout that you punch in every single time you serve it. What happened in 1973, 72-73, the creation of camera in Britain, I guess, yeah. It's not New England, right? It's England, Britain.
It's Great Britain, yeah.
Great Britain.
Why would it be New England?
I don't know.
That's in the States.
I know. But basically,
it's like, have you ever stopped to think that there's a Zealand? There's New Zealand.
Yeah, I know.
There's also a Zealand somewhere. it never crossed my mind that that was a thing until I went like,
shit.
oh, I'm an idiot. Of course there's got to be a Zealand, considering there's a New Zealand.
Where's
just
Zealand?
like there was a New York. Man, anyways, so it's geography for me. I'm bad at it.
We're both bad at
Please
it.
carry on.
Yeah.
Sorry about this little soliloquy there.
So 1970s goes in. You have a big rise of those fake cask ales coming up, which is probably something that was bound to happen. But what happened is that the camera showed up. It's campaign for real ales. So they created a description that states what's a proper real ale or cask ale. So let me read that for you guys. So it needs to be unfiltered, unpasteurized, and still active on the yeast. This is a real ale, and it's not related to the contain it's been put in. So it could be in a bottle or in a cask. But overall, all this leaves me on one thing. Everyone has two ways to see casks. The first one is a flat, warm, and weird way to serve beer. And the second one is a cool way to serve fresh beer and have the real true experience of a real ale. So Max, what's the science behind all of that in general?
Well, first off, to go back on your last statement, the way to serve a cask is with a hand pump. So already there, you can assume that, okay, if it's a hand pump, there's no CO2 or nitrogen or any kind of gas getting pumped in aside from oxygen. So it has a very short shelf life in the sense that the more oxygen you expose to it, the more you're going to develop off flavors from that beer. So it stands to reason that, yeah, maybe your experience with these kinds of beers were bad experiences because maybe you had an older cask, maybe it was the second day or the third day, or maybe the brewery decided to keep it for a week, which you shouldn't do.
Nope.
There's ways against this. Some people, as you say, they go against the camera and they actually pump CO2 in there, which, is it really a cask then? I don't think so. It's just like a weird looking keg in that case.
Yeah.
So casks are mainly used as a way to transport beer. I don't know if I touched on this earlier. It was the other version of the video. I don't know. But anyways.
We spoke about boats.
We spoke about boats, yes. But in this case, it's just another format. You got your bottles, you got your kegs, you got your growlers, your crowlers, you got everything else. It's just a new way to do it.
Yeah.
The way you do it, as you've said historically, and the right way, if you ask me, to do a cask, would be closer to the end of fermentation, where you're still going to have some yeast in suspension. Put your beer in the cask, add the ingredients you want to add. Lately, a lot of hops are being used. It's kind of the popular thing to do with beer. Although I think there's going to be a switch in what people like in beer. Right now we're seeing a lot of hops. I think yeast is the next thing to really take a look at. The yeast has a lot to do with the beer. We'll talk about that in another video, but anyway.
Lactose,
so you add your
move
ingredients.
over, yeast is coming, right?
Yeah, yeast was always there, that's the thing, but now people are going to start looking at yeast and realizing that a lot of the flavors they like from beer are actually directly derived from the yeast that was used.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, the hops are right in your face, but the yeast is the subtleties behind the overall experience of the beer.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll get there later. So you have your cask, you have your wort that you've added in that's being fermented. It's not quite beer yet, but it's close to. You add your other ingredients that you want to add in there. If it's dry hopping, it's fruiting, if it's spices, whatever you want to be creative with, you put it in, and then you seal it back up. Now the yeast is still going to be active, it's still going to ferment in there, it's still going to create some sort of pressure on there, and it's still going to create CO2. So the concept of having your yeah, go ahead.
Should you add a little bit of sugar to kind of like spice it up a little bit so it creates a little bit more
Sure,
action?
Why not? If you want to add sugar to make sure that it is going to re-ferment, go for it. If you add fruits, I'd say don't add the sugar. There's enough sugar in those fruits. It's fructose. The yeast shouldn't have much trouble making alcohol with that, fermenting that.
Perfect. That was
I lost my train of thought.
Then
add the sugar, add that.
Yeast, keep fermenting in the cask, create CO2.
Yeah, so you keep fermenting the cask, there's going to be some CO2 that's going to be created. So yeah, the concept of having a flat cask beer, I mean, sure, sometimes if it's old, but if it's brand new, if you've just tapped it, there's going to be a bit of carbonation in there, and it's not going to be the same carbonation you're used to, because it's generally yeast-driven carbonation. I find is a little easier on the palate. You don't get as much bite from it.
It has a
It is what it is.
more creamy feel to it, from what I remember.
It has a lot more creamy feel. Yeah, definitely. And then from there, you have your cask. Have your cask fest. I'm sure I had something else that I'm blanking on right now.
I think it sums up pretty much
enjoyable.
like how Cask works and how enjoyable they are and how careful people should be with them. It's something that it's a fragile beer at that point. It's not.
Oh yeah, and
protected.
they suck to make. That's the other thing I wanted to add. Like as a brewer, yeah, you can be super creative, but you're doing 20 liters at a time. It can be a little frustrating when you have to, like, there's a lot of prep that goes around filling one of these casks in modern days. Back in the day, it was the only way to have your beer, so it was just another way to fill it.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's mostly a artsy way to showcase your beer. It's something a little different. And with Casks Fest and with a lot of demand from restaurants, from licensees to have these casks, and they don't know necessarily how to really serve them, it can be a little like, well, do you really want a cask or do you not?
Yeah.
That's why having an event like Cask Fest is refreshing, because you have real casks there, and you have real people being creative with their casks.
And actually, not a regulated way to serve them. Like, you're assured that your beer will be served the proper way, not just thrown over there in the fridge, be served like in the 4 days tapped and then forgotten, and on a Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday comes and you have new customers coming in and your cask is not good anymore, and you get
Yeah, and
bad
another thing I wanted to
impression.
bring, and I just remembered what
Yeah.
it was, isinglass. Isinglass is made from fish bladder, and it's used as a thinning to clarify beer. It's used a lot in cask, a lot less now because of dietary specifications. If
Okay.
you're a vegan, you're not going to want to drink beer that has isinglass in it. I don't want to scare you, because no one uses isinglass. It's not something that's common.
Yeah.
If you see a beer with isinglass in it, it's marginal. It's not the norm.
Okay.
I've talked to a lot of breweries. No one uses that.
Yeah, okay.
Why? Because of things like that, and also because there's other ways to clarify your beer, like Irish moss. That's not quite as intrusive as isinglass. You can
Yeah.
also there's a bunch of different ways, but historically people would put isinglass in casks to clarify the beer. Although back then, I guess there was a period where clear beer was very important. At this point, it's not that important anymore.
We don't really care about fish in our beer anymore. Hopefully there's none. Like,
Well, it's more the clarity we don't care. That's
exactly.
the thing.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
We're not-
We care about the fish. We don't care about clarity.
Exactly. So more
Pays for days.
more A's, less fishy thing in my beer. Fishy thing.
Exactly. No, I think that pretty much sums up casks.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, then leave a like and share with your friends. Let us know what cask beer you had last. I guess that's a good question.
That's a very good question.
And if you enjoyed it,
Yeah.
and if you enjoyed it, some people do, some people don't. It is an acquired taste in a sense. And I guess we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, what? Next video. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bing. Bing.